Welcome back to the story of Fatima. We've seen how the shepherds were chosen and prepared by heaven for the most important mission they had, and still for our time. We saw how the angel came to them 3 times in 1916, and the 3rd time he came, he gave them Holy Communion, fortifying them with the grace of the Most Blessed Sacrament, the grace of the Holy Eucharist, for their very important mission. Then we saw in May of 1917 how the children, after seeing Our Lady, agreed among themselves to not tell anyone, to not tell even their mothers. But Jacinta was so excited, was so moved by the beauty and the experience of Our Lady's appearance, that when her mother came home that evening, she told her mother, and the whole family heard about it at the dinner table. And that way the word spread throughout the village and the countryside. And so in June we saw the Blessed Virgin comes back. What happened in June is this time, because the word had spread around the village, and even though it was the feast of St. Anthony, the village patron saint and the patron saint of Portugal, the children rather would go to the Cova de Ira, where they promised to see Our Lady at noon. And as a result of that, 50 people followed them. 50 people wanted to know. Some were curious, some were devout, and some were skeptical. But these 50 people accompanied them to see what would happen. Now Lucy was very certain Our Lady would come on time, as she said, and she did come. And so Our Lady spoke to the 3 children and said some very important things. First of all, Our Lady was asked when she came, "Your Excellency, what would you like to, what do you want of me? I want you to come back here on the 13th of next month. I want you to pray the rosary every day. I want you to learn to read, and I will tell you more what else I want you to do." Then Lucy started to pray, started to ask for the cure of some sick person. And Lucy said, the Blessed Virgin told her, that if this person is converted, he'll be cured within the year. Then Lucy asked to go to heaven soon. And Our Lady responded, "Yes, Francesco and Jacinta I will soon take to heaven, but you must stay some time longer on earth to make me known and loved. God wants to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. To those persons who embrace this devotion, I promise salvation. To those souls who embrace this devotion will be as flowers placed by me before the throne of God." We see here already the very important theme of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, but it doesn't stop there. Lucy was sad. She was sad because she was going to lose her 2 companions. They were going to go to heaven, and she wanted to go to heaven soon. Our Lady saw that Lucy was sad and said, "Are you sad, my child? Do not be sad. My Immaculate Heart will be your refuge. My Immaculate Heart will be your comfort and the way that leads you to God." This message of Our Lady's to Lucy is not meant for Lucy only. My Immaculate Heart will be your refuge. My Immaculate Heart will be your comfort and the way that leads you to God is also a message for all of us if we will but be devoted, but embrace devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This is very crucial to the message of Fatima, and we will see this theme coming back later on in July particularly. Now, as Our Lady spoke, she opened her hands. And as she had before, when her hands opened, the light came from the palms of her hands. And this light then fell on the 3 children. The light from one hand fell on Jacinta and Francesco, and they went up to heaven. And the light from the other hand fell on Lucy, and they went down to the earth. In this light, they understood what Our Lady said, that she would soon come to take them to heaven. That is, Jacinta and Francesco, in that light. Whereas the light falling on Lucy, she understood that she would stay some time longer on earth. And so Our Lady again told them to pray the rosary. And she told Lucy that she had to learn to read and write. In fact, Lucy was able to read and write within a few years, even though it wasn't the custom at that time for girls to learn to go to school. We will talk about this apparition in a moment. We'll continue to talk about it shortly. When Our Lady opened her hands, besides seeing the light coming from her hands, they also saw her heart, her Immaculate Heart, all circled with thorns. And the children understood that this was the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and that those thorns represented the sins which cried out for reparation. Our Lady loves us so much, and people are so ungrateful towards her, that she's very much hurt by people's ingratitude and by their indifference and even their scorn. And so Our Lady needs reparation for these sins. She needs to be consoled by our acts of reparation. And the children understood this. And in fact, this is explained further in later apparitions. And so it's a very important part of the message is devotion to the Immaculate Heart and also reparation to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This is something that, and also that devotion to the Immaculate Heart is in fact a comfort. And not only is it to us personally, but not only is it a comfort, it's a way that leads us to God. This devotion is a sure road to heaven. In fact, the practice of the first Saturdays, which is again explained further on, is a way to assure our salvation. It seems so simple, and it is, but it's so very profound. Devotion to the Immaculate Heart is at the heart of the message of Fatima. And it's important for us to try to understand this. We should ask Our Lady to help us understand. In fact, on this occasion, the children experienced a great increase in their love and devotion to the Immaculate Heart. We should ask for this grace every day ourselves. Now, Our Lady did not tell them to keep this message of June 13th secret, but they felt moved by God to do so, especially about the vision of Our Lady's Immaculate Heart. And so when they were asked about what Our Lady said, of course they told the people that Our Lady asked us to pray the Rosary, to continue to pray the Rosary every day. But when they asked about other parts, the children said it's a secret. Now, Our Lady didn't say it was a secret, but they felt moved by God to say that for the moment it was a secret. Of course, the great secret comes in July 13th. The great secret is divided into 3 parts. And we'll talk about that when we get to the July 13th apparition. But I would first like to mention also that Lucy saw many things. She lived a long time. She lived until she was almost 98 years old. She died in 2005. And she saw not only the World War I, she saw World War II take place. She herself was almost dodging bullets in the Spanish Civil War before the Second World War. And so she lived through many trying times for mankind and for people in the church. She saw the people outraging the Blessed Rosary after the Second Vatican Council and so forth. But she always could take comfort in Our Lady's words, that my Immaculate Heart will be your comfort and the way that leads you to God. But Lucy wants us to realize that it's not just for her, but it's for all those who are devoted to Our Lady, that her Immaculate Heart is our comfort and our way that leads us to God. And let us keep this in mind. And now we will come back in a few moments and talk about the revelation or the apparition of June 13th, of July 13th. But first, we must remember what the priest said after the apparition, that he thought it was from the devil. And that's what leads us. What took place for the rest of July was Lucy's doubts and her trials, because she thought maybe all these apparitions were from the devil. And that is how we understand when July 13th takes place, Lucy is still in great doubt. Let us come to that shortly. Thank you. Welcome back to the story of Fatima. Now, the parish priest had told Lucy and her mother that he thought that what was happening to Lucy in the cova was an appearance of the devil. Lucy's mother continued to repeat this to her, that it was the devil, for the whole month. And this began to disturb and bother Lucy, and she began to believe it could have been the devil. So she didn't want to go back, but she didn't tell her cousins first. They were planning to go back on July 13th, but Lucy the more the month passed, the more she made up her mind not to go back July 13th. Finally, on the day of July the 12th, the day before the next apparition, Lucy told her cousins, "I'm not going to go." "Why not?" "Well, you tell the Blessed Virgin, you tell that person that I'm not going because I think it might be the devil." And Jacinta said, "Well, we'll go and I'll talk to Our Lady." Remember, Jacinta had never spoken to Our Lady. She listened, she could see, but she never spoke. Whereas Francesco could only see, he couldn't hear her. Jacinta said, "I'll speak to Our Lady." But she cried. "Why are you crying?" "Because you don't want to go." And so they left it that way, that on the day of the 12th, that Lucy was not going. Lucy was more and more afraid and more doubtful that she was being deceived. And even in the morning, in the 13th, in fact, the crowds were coming. 5,000 people came to be there at the apparition on July 13th. And a lot of the people wanted to talk to the children before. But Lucy, that day, hid herself. Her mother thought she was out playing, but she was actually hiding in her own house, and her own mother didn't even know it. And even the morning of the 13th, Lucy was still afraid and doubtful. But when the time came for them to go to the apparition site, to make their appointment at noon, suddenly Lucy's doubts and fears all left her. And she went to her cousin's house, just less than 5 minutes walk away from her own in the village of Angestrel. And she said, "Aren't you going?" "No, we couldn't go. We won't go without you." And then Jacinta and Francesco, realizing that Lucy had changed her mind, they got up and said, "Let's go." And so, happily, all three of them went to go to the apparition site, but they couldn't make a lot of progress because there's so many people there. And people stopped them along the way, asking for prayers for their special intentions for a sick person or for some other problem or for their brothers or fathers who had gone to the war and so forth. Finally, they got to the apparition site, and the crowd was so great. In the meantime, the mother of Jacinta and Francesco went to Lucy's mother and said, "You must come with me. Maybe this fear of impending evil because of what the pastor had said about the devil, they were afraid maybe something will happen, maybe something terrible will happen." So that both mothers went with a blessed candle, which they would light in case something evil was going to happen. But the crowd was so great they couldn't get close to the children. In fact, in part they were hiding themselves behind a bush. Whereas Jacinta and Francesco's father came to get closer. He was still some way back, but then he decided he wanted to get as close as he could, but he couldn't. At least, not at first. Because the crowd was so great. But as he got a little closer, he could see two men he recognized. And they had surrounded the children so as to protect them from the crowd pressing in on them. And then one of them recognized him and said, "There's their father." And they called him up to them. And as a result, Ty Marto was right beside them during the apparition. And of course, he describes what he saw as well. But most important is what took place, what the children saw and heard. This apparition is the most important in one way of all the apparitions. And we go to Lucy's memoirs that she wrote under obedience to her bishop many years later to tell us what happened. And we will continue with that in a moment. As we were saying, the children came to the COVID era with a crowd of 5,000 people there. It was quite a change because at first Lucy wasn't going to go, and then her doubts were all taken away from her at the last moment, and then she went willingly. And she was surrounded by 5,000 people, so even her father had difficulty getting close to the crowd, Jacinta and Francesco's father. But before the apparition started, Lucy could see the flash of light. She saw the flash of light, and she said, "Take your umbrellas down." The people had their umbrellas up because of the great heat. It was summertime now, and it was very hot. And so the people carried umbrellas to protect themselves from the heat. The sun was shining in the sky. It was a beautiful day. There was not a wisp of a cloud. But when they took their umbrellas down, shortly after that, Taimarto could see that the sun became hazy. There was no cloud in the sky, but it became less hot. And the people noticed it. In fact, something else was noticed in the atmosphere. The sun became so dull, so to speak, that the people could see the stars in the sky at noon, and high noon, without a cloud in the sky, with no eclipse. Just, they could see this. They saw this again in September. It was quite striking. But then Our Lady came, and Lucy was so overcome with joy that she couldn't speak at first. And Jacinta poked her and said, "She's here, she's talking to you. Speak to her." So Lucy again, as she had done on other occasions, she said, "What does Your Excellency want of me?" Our Lady replied by saying, "I want you to continue to pray the Rosary every day, in honor of Our Lady of the Rosary, to obtain peace and an end of the war." And she also said, because only she, Our Lady of the Rosary that is, only she can help you. Now, Our Lady then explained that when you pray the Rosary, at the end of each decade, to pray this prayer, "O my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell, lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need." This is the second prayer that Our Lady taught them. The first prayer she told them in May. She didn't give the words, but they all said them together, inspired by Our Lady. And the first prayer that Our Lady taught, as I mentioned, was, "O Most Holy Trinity, I adore Thee. My God, I love Thee in the Most Blessed Sacrament." Now on July 13th, Our Lady taught them the prayer, this time giving them the actual words. "O my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell, lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need." She said to pray this prayer at the end of each decade of the Rosary. So now Our Lady continued, and Lucy started to ask about the people who asked for cures and so forth. And Our Lady said she would cure some and not others. She said about the boy who was crippled and who was poor, that she would not cure him, and that she would not take him out of his poverty. This was John Carrera, who is the son of Maria Carrera, and he lived, as Our Lady said, but he lived a holy life working at this sanctuary. And so Our Lady's prophecies, even a little prophecy about John Carrera, was seen to take place exactly as she said. But Our Lady did that out of mercy for him. I remember the story of Padre Pio, who was asked for a cure by a man by the name of Pietro, who was blind. And Padre Pio said, "I can cure you, but if I do, that you will sin by your eyes, and then you will die and go to hell." And Pietro said, "Then don't cure me." So we ask for prayers, we ask for graces from God, but God gives them to us if we ask for them rightly and if they're good for us. And so at Fatima, Lucy, still remembering that the pastor said it might be the devil, and her mother repeating this over and over again, and people doubting here and there, she asked Our Lady for a sign, so that the people might believe that you are appearing to us. And Our Lady said, "Continue to come here each month until October. In October, I will work a miracle that all might see and believe. And so we have the promise of the miracle from Our Lady, so that we would know that she was truly coming, not just in July, not just in June, but the whole series of apparitions, that this message indeed comes from God. And of course, when we get to October, we'll describe the most spectacular miracle that took place there before 70,000 people. But on this day, Lucy tells us, again, Our Lady opened her hands a third time. Now, when she opened her hand, each time before, light came from her hands. Each time before, it fell on the children. This time, light indeed came from her hands. But it did not fall on the children, but fell on the ground between Our Lady and the children. And the children looked down on the ground to see what the light was shining on. And here's what Lucy describes. We saw, as it were, a vast sea of fire, in which were plunged, all blackened and burnt, the devils and the souls of the damned, which were cast about in the flames without any weight or poise, amid loud cries of pain and despair, which horrified us so that we trembled with fear. Lucy tells us that had not Our Lady promised to take them to heaven, that they themselves would have died of fright seeing this vision. And Our Lady then spoke and said, they looked up to her, pleading for mercy. Our Lady said, you have seen hell, where the souls of poor sinners go. It is to save sinners that God wills to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. Now this vision of hell is the first part of the secret of Fatima. There are 3 parts to the secret, and we will talk about what we know of the second part in a moment. Our Lady was asked about curing some sick people, and she said, some I will cure, others I will not. As to the crippled boy, I will not cure him or take him out of his poverty. He must say the Rosary every day with his family. He is John Carrera. And then Lucy told Our Lady about a sick person who wanted to die and be taken to heaven soon. Our Lady said, he shall not hurry things. I know well when I will come for him. Then Our Lady spoke about sinners. She told the children, sacrifice yourself for sinners. And say often this prayer, especially when you make some sacrifice. O my Jesus, it is for love of you, it is for the conversion of sinners, and in reparation for sins against the Immaculate Heart of Mary, I offer this sacrifice to thee. O my Jesus, it is for love of thee, for the conversion of sinners, and reparation for sins against the Immaculate Heart of Mary, I offer this sacrifice to thee. This is something we should do often. Pray this prayer often and offer sacrifices often for the conversion of sinners. And then Our Lady showed them the vision of hell in this way. Welcome back to the story of Fatima. We have seen that the Blessed Virgin showed the children the vision of hell. This vision is the first part of the secret, the great secret, the one that was not to be revealed. Our Lady told them explicitly not to reveal this secret until sometime later. This first part of the secret was written down in Lucy's memoirs in 1941. It was written down twice, in memoir number 3 and again in memoir number 4. The second part of the secret follows immediately. Our Lady said, you have seen hell where the souls of poor sinners go. In order to save sinners, God wills to establish in the world devotion to my Immaculate Heart. That is the beginning of the second part of the secret. Here's what else is the second part. If what I say to you is done, many souls will be saved, and there will be peace. This war will soon end. But if men do not cease offending God, another worse war will begin in the reign of Pius XI. When you see a night illuminated by an unknown light, know that it is the great sign that God gives you, that He is about to punish the world by means of war, famine, persecution of the Church, and persecution of the Holy Father. To prevent this, I will come to ask for the consecration of Russia to my Immaculate Heart and the communions of reparation on the first Saturday. To prevent this, I will come to ask for the consecration of Russia and the communions of reparation on the first Saturdays. If my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world, raising up wars and persecutions against the Church. The good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, various nations will be annihilated. That is the end of the second part of the secret. But Lucy's memoirs go on. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. The etc. marks the third part of the secret, the part that we haven't been told yet, even today. Although we do know much of what that etc. contains. But we'll talk about this on another program. Our Lady then said, "In the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me, Russia will be converted, and a period of peace will be given to mankind." This is a message of great hope and of great promise. Mankind has gone through more than 14,400 wars in the last 6,000 years. In all of recorded history, there have been more than 14,000 wars. Our Lady promises a period of peace, and she predicts and tells us that in the end, this will happen. Now, this promise of peace is a promise that God has made to us in the Old Testament by various prophets. We are told by the prophet Isaiah that they will learn the art of war no more, that they will turn their swords into plowshares. When you think that every nation has a school of war, and that the art, and some people would call it a science of war, is taught from generation to generation, and that this will cease, that one generation will not teach the next generation how to conduct war. So this period of peace will be for some time. Now, in all recorded history, we have not seen such a period of peace, and yet Our Lady of Fatima promises it to mankind. But it will not come until, first of all, her requests are granted. And that is why the message of Fatima is so important for you, because facing us today are two choices: war and annihilation of nations, or period of peace. And if we don't choose this for ourselves, then our successors will. Sooner or later, Our Lady's promise will be realized. But the question before us is, will we have the annihilation of nations and the enslavement of entire peoples and countries and even the whole world until Our Lady's requests are granted? That is what the second part of the secret is about. Our Lady said the Pope would have much to suffer. After this vision of Our Lady giving the second part of the secret, some days later, Jacinta had several visions. She saw in one of these visions, the Pope was in a large room, and people outside were very angry with him, and they were throwing rocks and stones at him, and he was crying. Jacinta understood the Pope will have much to suffer. This vision has not taken place yet, although some commentaries, perhaps rightly so, pointing out that the attacks on the present Pope are symbolized by those rocks thrown at the Pope, and the Pope is crying for all these personal attacks on him. Now, the second vision of the Pope Jacinta saw also involved people, but this time it was different. This time, the Pope was out in the countryside, and the people were there with him, and the roads and the highways were packed with people, and they were hungry, and they were starving, and they were praying with the Pope. And the Pope was praying before an image of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. This also has not taken place yet, and perhaps it's what will take place just before the Pope does the consecration of Russia, which ushers in the period of peace. Because Our Lady says, in the end my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia, Russia will be converted, and a period of peace will be given to mankind. Our Lady has explained that it is through the means, through this act of obedience by the Pope and the bishops to consecrate Russia, that Russia is converted, that Russia is saved, and that peace is given to the world. And Lucy has also explained that many times, she said, Jacinta and Francesco, as well as myself, were told by Our Lady that Russia is the instrument of chastisement chosen by heaven to punish the whole world if we do not beforehand obtain the conversion of that poor nation. In other words, God has special designs on Russia. Russia will either be an instrument of chastisement or an instrument of peace. It depends on the Pope and the bishops to consecrate Russia. When Russia is consecrated, it will be an instrument of peace and salvation to the world. But until that happens, Russia will be an instrument of chastisement that God uses to punish the whole world. Now, I realize that many people think that this is beyond us, but it really isn't. Some people think that Russia is not very powerful today, but it is. Some even say it's more powerful than the United States, and that what has happened in Russia is really what the newspapers tell us was happening in Russia isn't really the full story. But we can trust Our Lady to tell us the truth, that one way or the other, just when she spoke about Russia in 1917, and no one could imagine that Russia would be any difficulty to anybody, or even themselves, since they were in the middle of the First World War, and they had lost so many soldiers, and their government was falling apart and so forth, that no one could think of Russia being a difficulty. And today perhaps people feel the same way. But remember the prophecy. If my requests are granted, Russia will be converted and the world will have peace. If my requests are not granted, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world, raising up wars and persecutions against the Church. The good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, various nations will be annihilated. We have not seen the fulfillment of this prophecy, and we have not seen the consecration of Russia done yet. We are at the crossroads right now, and you can do much about it. Remember to pray for the Holy Father. Pray the Rosary every day. Pray much for the Holy Father, Jesus said. He will do it, but it will be late. The hour is late already, and the message of Fatima urges you today to not just be on the sideline, but to be a participant. Pray your Rosary every day. Pray for the Pope to do the consecration with the bishops as soon as possible. We will continue with the story of Fatima shortly. Lucy then asked Our Lady, after she gave us the secret. Remember, the secret is in 3 parts, but it's one secret. The first part of the secret is about the vision of hell. The second part is a prediction of the role of Russia in the world and the role the Pope has to play to bring peace to the world. And the third part, of course, is where Our Lady says, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. The words of Our Lady after the etc. have not been given to us by the Pope and the bishops. And we will talk about this in a special program. Then we have the conclusion to the secret, which is, in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph. The Holy Father will consecrate Russia to me. Russia will be converted and a period of peace given to mankind. After Our Lady gave the secret to Lucy, Lucy said, is there anything more you wish of me? No, that is all. And so Our Lady urged the children to come back on the 13th of August, which they certainly fully intended to do. And we'll hear about that in our next segment. The children were most impressed by the vision of hell. Jacinta wondered about this vision, and she wished that Our Lady would show this vision to everyone so no one would go to hell. Jacinta asked Lucy, you forgot to ask her. Why didn't you ask her to show the other people the vision of hell? And Lucy said, I forgot to ask her. So the vision of hell led them to make many more sacrifices for sinners. And we will talk about how the children conducted themselves between the July apparition and the August apparition on our next segment. God bless you.
Nell'ultima apparizione del 13 settembre 1917, la Madonna mostrò in silenzio lo scapolare del Carmelo, un gesto che indica il suo desiderio che quello stesso scapolare venga indossato da tutti. La Madonna sa come far avvenire i miracoli e sono sicura che troverà il modo affinché il Papa guardi questo DVD e ascolti in prima persona cosa hanno da dire i fedeli in merito alle condizioni in cui si trovano oggi il mondo e la Chiesa. Troppi governi e troppi religiosi, è triste a dirsi, lo so, ma è così, inclusi molti sacerdoti, parroci, vescovi e persino cardinali del Vaticano, non stanno rispondendo con la dovuta serietà e la necessaria prontezza a questa malvagità che minacciano la vita e l'anima di innumerevoli persone in tutto il mondo. Santo Padre, il vostro gregge è disperato, vulnerabile e confuso dinanzi a questi pericoli che minacciano di portar via la vita e soprattutto l'anima di tanti fedeli. Siamo profondamente preoccupati per il futuro dei nostri figli e ancor più per il loro benessere spirituale. Il mondo è scoraggiato e si unisce all'unisono in un grido disperato. Quale speranza ci rimane? Santo Padre, la speranza per il mondo intero è nelle vostre mani, perché soltanto voi potete salvare l'umanità obbedendo alla santa richiesta della Madre di Dio, la Beata Vergine Maria, la quale a Fatima ha detto: solo io posso aiutarvi. La Madonna ha chiesto che il Santo Padre, insieme a tutti i vescovi del mondo, compiano nello stesso giorno e alla stessa ora una consacrazione collegiale della Russia al Cuore Immacolato di Maria. Si tratta di una preghiera di soli 5 minuti. Santo Padre, non vi preoccupate delle ripercussioni di questo gesto o delle minacce che vi intimano di non farlo. Abbiate fede nella promessa della Madonna. Il paradiso non commette errori. Nostro Signore ha compiuto il grande miracolo del sole e ha fatto sì che le profezie di Fatima si compissero tutte proprio affinché voi, santità, poteste credere in esse ed obbedire quindi alle richieste della Madonna di Fatima. Affidatevi completamente alla guida amorevole che vi offre la Madonna di Fatima. Affidatevi alla sua materna promessa e protezione, come giustamente voi ricordate ai fedeli di tutto il mondo. La Madonna ha chiesto la consacrazione della Russia, non del mondo. Ed ella non gioca con le parole. Vi prego, Santo Padre, di prendere seriamente e letteralmente le parole della Madonna. Non possiamo cambiare una formula preparata da nostro Signore, che il cielo ci ha fatta avere per mezzo della Beata Vergine Maria. Santo Padre, quando battezzate un bambino di nome Giovanni Paolo, voi non battezzate di certo tutti i bambini del mondo, perché quel battesimo non sarebbe valido. Santo Padre, quando consacrate la chiesa della Madonna di Fatima, voi non consacrate tutte le chiese del mondo, perché quella consacrazione non sarebbe valida. Senza nominare specificatamente e precisamente il nome di quel bambino oppure il nome di quella chiesa, nessuno dei due sarà stato consacrato in modo efficace. Allo stesso modo e a maggior ragione, non è possibile consacrare la Russia al Cuore Immacolato di Maria se non la si menziona per nome durante tale consacrazione. Consacrare tutte le nazioni del mondo non equivale a scegliere in particolar modo la Russia, preservandola e consacrandola specificatamente al Signore. Consacrare tutte le nazioni del mondo non equivale a scegliere in particolar modo la Russia, preservandola e consacrandola specificatamente al Signore. Questa consacrazione non è mai avvenuta e non può avere quindi gli effetti promessi. Santo Padre, voi, meglio di tutti noi, siete a conoscenza di questa verità. Noi fedeli cattolici guardiamo a voi per essere protetti e guidati contro le forze diaboliche che attentano alla nostra anima tutti i giorni della nostra vita. Per questo non riusciamo a capire come mai non abbiate ancora voluto compiere la consacrazione della Russia. A secondo di quanto detto dalla Madonna, l'ordine impartito dal Signore di consacrare la Russia è stato ritardato già troppo a lungo ed il tempo a nostra disposizione sta per scadere. La Madonna ha offerto l'unica soluzione possibile, ma questa può realizzarsi soltanto grazie a voi, Santità. Ogni giorno di ritardo nel compiere questa consacrazione comporta la perdita di un numero sempre maggiore di anime e di vite umane. Oggi centinaia di migliaia di persone vengono perseguitate, torturate e uccise a causa della propria fede in Cristo. Per favore, Santo Padre, non prolungate questo stato di cose, proteggete il vostro gregge, vi imploriamo di consacrare la Russia prima che sia troppo tardi per tutti noi. Lo diciamo con amore e devozione nei vostri confronti, Santità, anche alla luce di ciò che raffigura la visione del terzo segreto di Fatima. Santo Padre, noi preghiamo quotidianamente per voi. Salvateci, salvate i nostri figli e salvate anche voi stesso dagli orribili castighi profeziati da Gesù e da Maria se non procederemo al più presto ad obbedire alle richieste della Madonna di Fatima. Santo Padre, è venuto il momento di dimostrare alla Madonna di Fatima il vostro totale affidamento e la vostra assoluta obbedienza ai suoi comandi. Grazie e che Dio vi benedica tutti. Sono giunta per avvertire i fedeli che è necessario che facciano ammenda e chiedano perdono per i loro peccati. Non offendano più nostro Signore, che è già molto offeso. Nell'ultima apparizione del 13 settembre 1917, la Madonna mostrò in silenzio lo scapolare del Carmelo, un gesto che indica il suo desiderio che quello stesso scapolare venga indossato da tutti. La Madonna di Fatima ha detto: «Se le mie richieste non verranno esaudite, la Russia diffonderà i suoi orrori in tutto il mondo, provocando guerre e persecuzioni contro la Chiesa. I buoni saranno martirizzati. Il Santo Padre dovrà soffrire molto. Varie nazioni saranno annientate».
La Beata Vergine ci ha fornito un modo per ottenere la pace nel mondo, perché solo lei può aiutarci. In troppi, tuttavia, non si rendono conto della portata di queste parole. Forse ritengono che non sia accaduto niente di veramente drammatico e che non bisogna preoccuparsene troppo. Questo è dovuto al fatto che i giornalisti, i commentatori, i cosiddetti opinion leader della stampa e della televisione, in altre parole coloro che avrebbero il dovere di informarci, in realtà sono solo al soldo del nemico e comunque non fanno proprio il loro lavoro. E non ci dicono che dal momento in cui abbiamo rifiutato il messaggio di Fatima, perché l'umanità questo ha fatto, ha disprezzato e rifiutato Fatima, vi sono stati 1.680.000.000 di morti violente. Ripeto, 1 miliardo, cioè 1 seguito da 9 zeri, più altri 686 milioni di persone che sono morte a causa del fatto che abbiamo ignorato la Madonna di Fatima. Spero che questa cifra vi permetta di comprendere la portata spaventosa della decisione di ignorare la Madonna di Fatima. Sono 95 anni che l'umanità si permette di ignorarla e abbiamo già pagato un prezzo tremendo. Ma questo potrebbe raddoppiarsi, addirittura triplicarsi negli anni a venire se continueremo impunemente ad ignorarla. Solo pochi mesi fa l'umanità ha raggiunto l'incredibile numero di 7 miliardi di abitanti. Le Sacre Scritture ci dicono che a un certo punto, tra l'1 e i 2/3 della popolazione mondiale verranno spazzati via da una guerra mondiale. Francamente, se questo non ci desta dal nostro torpore, non so cosa potrebbe riuscirci. Forse qualche giornalista che ne parli in diretta sulla CNN? Oppure un articolo del New York Times? Non lo so. Ma quel che so per certo è che non abbiamo preso Fatima abbastanza sul serio. Le nostre responsabilità e i nostri doveri quotidiani ci portano via gran parte della giornata e tra studio, lavoro e famiglia le nostre 24 ore spesso volano via e non ci resta molto altro da fare. È ovvio che il Papa e i Vescovi abbiano una vita assolutamente densa di incontri e cose da fare, per carità, ma questo non può essere una scusa, né per loro né tantomeno per noi, poiché tutti noi dovremo mettere Fatima al primo posto tra le nostre priorità. Non esiste al mondo nulla di più serio, di più importante, di più urgente del messaggio della Madonna di Fatima. Alcuni anni fa ricevetti una lettera da parte di un vescovo piuttosto anziano, se non erro della diocesi di Ottawa in Canada. In quella sua lettera il vescovo in sostanza mi diceva una cosa del tipo: «Padre Gruner, se lei non alzasse così tanto la voce e non ci urlasse contro, forse cominceremo a prestare attenzione a cosa dice». Ecco cosa risposi a quel vescovo: «Eccellenza, la ringrazio moltissimo per il suo interesse e i suoi consigli e le sue preoccupazioni. Ora però, se potesse cortesemente spiegarmi come posso migliorare nel mio lavoro e attirare l'attenzione dei vescovi senza alzare troppo la voce, ne sarei veramente grato. Io odio alzare la voce e odio attirare l'attenzione su me stesso, ma non sembrano esservi alternative per diffondere questo messaggio». Vedete, i numeri non mentono. Ieri abbiamo partecipato alla Marcia per la Vita qui a Roma e questo perché non possiamo tacere dinanzi alla spaventosa piaga dell'aborto. Sin dal 1975 le statistiche parlano di oltre 1.300.000 aborti. E con le guerre si aggiungono altri 78 milioni di morti, per non parlare degli assassini di Stato, non solo in Russia ma anche in Cina, per arrivare agli oltre 230 milioni di morti. Si tratta di una cifra catastrofica che ci induce a ritenere, come fece Papa San Pio X, che si stiano avvicinando i giorni che precedono la venuta dell'Anticristo. L'enormità di queste cifre è secondo solo all'incredibile miopia di chi non vuol vedere queste cose, che stanno accadendo adesso intorno a noi. Fu proprio il cardinale Ratzinger a dire che il messaggio di Fatima si può trovare nelle scritture e che stiamo vivendo il periodo predetto dall'Apocalisse. Anche se è comprensibile distrarsi a causa delle informazioni fuorvianti che ci vengono date dalla stampa e dalla televisione, questi eccidi continuano ad accadere ogni giorno. E la loro portata è tale che ormai è innegabile che se non proprio nei giorni dell'Apocalisse o nei giorni che precedono la venuta dell'Anticristo, stiamo sicuramente vivendo in un'epoca che non ha precedenti nella storia dell'umanità. Pensiamo alla Chiesa Cattolica. L'unico altro momento della sua storia che possa paragonarsi alla crisi attuale risale all'epoca dell'eresia ariana, quando il 90% dei vescovi di allora cadde preda di quell'eresia. Erano rimasti solo 3-4 vescovi a combattere gli eretici e il più grande tra loro, Sant'Attanasio, fu addirittura scomunicato dal Papa nel 357. Ovviamente la sua era una scomunica solo teorica, perché come ci ha spiegato San Tommaso e come la Chiesa ha sempre insegnato, la legge non è fatta da ciò che dice il legislatore, ma essa è l'ordinato della ragione ed è per il bene comune. La legge della Chiesa afferma che nessuno può essere punito se non ha commesso un errore o un crimine. Quindi, poiché Attanasio rimase fedele alla vera fede cattolica, difendendola a oltranza, come era suo dovere in quanto fedele vescovo, non avrebbe dovuto essere punito. E non era colpevole malgrado il Papa di allora avesse emesso sentenza di scomunica. Successivamente, infatti, Papa Liberio si pentì del suo gesto, ma egli fu il primo Papa a non essere canonizzato sin dai tempi di San Pietro. È bene tenere a mente che non dobbiamo avere timore del giudizio dell'uomo, se siamo dalla parte di Dio. È un principio che non dobbiamo mai dimenticare, così come il fatto che la profezia nella Chiesa ha una funzione ben precisa, una funzione che non avrà mai fine e che va rispettata, così come vanno rispettati gli uffici apostolici. Come ci insegna San Paolo nella lettera agli Efesini, infatti, la Chiesa è costruita sulla base degli apostoli, ma anche dei profeti, quindi non soltanto sui primi, e pertanto il ruolo della profezia è fondamentale. Le scritture ci dicono che dobbiamo estinguere lo spirito e non dobbiamo disprezzare le profezie, ma che dobbiamo esaminare ogni cosa e ritenere il bene, astenendoci da ogni specie di male. Ecco perché sono decenni che promuovo il messaggio di Fatima, non solo perché esso è l'unico tra tutti i messaggi mariani, ma anche perché è stato approvato dalla Chiesa. Durante un suo discorso qui a Roma diversi anni fa, padre Joseph Saint-Marie, e cioè colui che scrisse il discorso pronunciato da Giovanni Paolo II a Fatima nel 1982, disse giustamente che il ruolo della gerarchia è quello di giudicare ed esaminare se un profeta affermi o meno la verità. Ma una volta che la gerarchia ha riconosciuto che quel messaggio proviene da Dio, allora il Papa e i vescovi sono obbligati a seguirlo, non per obbedienza al profeta, bensì a Dio che usa quel profeta per comunicare con loro. Questo dovere è intrinsecamente legato al loro ruolo di pastori nella Chiesa. Non sono certo io a dire al Papa quel che deve fare, è la Madonna di Fatima a farlo. Io mi limito a spiegare cosa significano le parole della Madonna, a rispondere alle obiezioni dei teologi o di altri che non hanno avuto il tempo di rifletterci abbastanza. Ma torniamo a quel 1917, quando la Madonna dette all'umanità un messaggio per ottenere la pace. Le era stato chiesto di aiutarci e così fece, dandoci un rimedio per ottenere la pace nel mondo, che però abbiamo ostinatamente rifiutato nei successivi 95 anni. Nel 1931, durante l'apparizione di Riangio, Nostro Signore fornì a Sor Lucia, o meglio al Papa e ai vescovi per mezzo della religiosa, una vera e propria lezione di storia. Disse infatti: «Fa sapere ai miei ministri, dato che continuano a seguire l'esempio del re di Francia nel ritardare l'esecuzione del mio ordine, che come il re di Francia anche loro lo seguiranno nella sciagura». Di che esempio stava parlando? In questa apparizione Nostro Signore fece riferimento ai re di Francia. Il 17 giugno 1689, per mezzo di Santa Margherita Maria, Dio aveva ordinato al re di Francia di consacrare il suo paese al Sacro Cuore di Gesù. Sin da allora i tre re che si succedettero al trono della Francia ignorarono la profezia di Santa Margherita Maria e l'ordine che attraverso di lei aveva ricevuto dal Signore. Persino mentre era ancora in vita Margherita Maria Aloque venne riconosciuta come una santa. I suoi contemporanei erano a conoscenza della sua santità, quindi i re di Francia, per aver ignorato la sua profezia, pagarono con la loro vita. Il 17 giugno 1789, infatti, esattamente 100 anni dopo la richiesta di Nostro Signore, il re di Francia venne privato della sua autorità da parte del Terzo Stato. 3 settimane più tardi, con la presa della Bastiglia, avrebbe avuto inizio la Rivoluzione francese. Del 21 gennaio 1793, re Luigi XVI sarebbe stato ghigliottinato dai rivoluzionari. Nostro Signore ha fatto un legame assolutamente incontrovertibile. Fa sapere ai miei ministri, dato che seguono l'esempio del re di Francia nel ritardare l'esecuzione del mio ordine, che come il re di Francia anche loro lo seguiranno nella sciagura. Fino ad oggi i papi e i vescovi hanno ignorato o comunque ritardano l'esecuzione di quell'ordine divino, accampando una scusa dopo l'altra. Penso ormai di averle sentite tutte nella mia carriera, ma come abbiamo già abbondantemente dimostrato con le nostre conferenze e le nostre pubblicazioni, quelle scuse fanno acqua da tutte le parti. Non c'è alcun motivo che impedisca la consacrazione della Russia, ma purtroppo fino ad ora hanno scelto di non farla. Ci troviamo davanti a un bivio. Nessuno può ordinare al Santo Padre di fare alcunché, tantomeno il sottoscritto. Solo il Papa ha infatti l'autorità di ordinare alla Chiesa di compiere un atto simile. Questo non vuol dire, tuttavia, che i fedeli non abbiano delle carte da giocare, ma di questo in particolare parleremo in un altro discorso. Ad ogni modo, il messaggio di Fatima non riguarda solo il Papa. Come ha detto proprio Benedetto XVI mentre si recava a Fatima, nel terzo segreto si predice la passione della Chiesa e una persecuzione del Santo Padre. Ma il Papa fa parte della Chiesa, quindi non è solo lui a soffrirne le conseguenze, ma tutta la Chiesa cattolica.